All right, we're going to focus on the national race here for a second. We do have a national presidential candidate with us, which is great. The next speaker is the two-term 68th governor of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts from 1991 to 1997. In 2016, he was the Libertarian Party's vice presidential candidate. His running mate was Gary Johnson. It gives me great pleasure to introduce to you Massachusetts Governor Bill Weld.
Also like to thank Governor Weld for coming. He's well respected, and we're happy that he's here. And some of the familiar names, Gary Johnson, we've had him here and met with him in our office down in Concord several times. So thank him for coming, and here we go. Just going to take questions.
Thanks so much, and thank you, Keith, as well. It's a real pleasure for me to be here. I didn't have to get any further than the word anti-tax to know that I would be completely comfortable. You had me at hello, as they say in the movies. Both of my terms in Mass were really grounded on the anti-tax issue. When I ran the first time, I was below asterisk. I had no name recognition whatsoever. My only ally was a woman named Barbara Anderson, who headed Citizens for Limited Taxation, which was dedicated to keeping down property taxes in the state. I was her only ally, and our job was to keep the legislature and the local governments from raising property taxes, which were way too high. And when I got elected, I vetoed every attempt to undercut that, and that was my signature as governor. The other signature was I rolled the leadership of the legislature on another tax, which they had passed just the year before. It was a sales tax on services. So everything right down to the bronze baby boots that you get when a baby was born was called a service, and so the legislature would put taxes on that. So we went right to the people on that and said, this is outrageous. It's an entirely new income stream on top of income and property taxes. And the legislature said, over our dead body, are you going to repeal that tax? Well, that's exactly what happened. The rank and file listened to what we had to say, and it was repealed, and the legislature for 2 terms never picked a fight with me on taxes again. Closer? Yeah. So in my 2 terms, I cut taxes 21 times, never raised them, and never met a tax cut I didn't like. One place where I'm a little bit different than others is I also believe it's important to cut spending as the other way to keep the growth of government in check. And when I was governor, I was ranked the most fiscally conservative governor in the United States by both the Wall Street Journal and the Cato Institute, which are the 2 organizations that really pay attention to fiscal conservatism. So I'm a true economic conservative in this race. I'm running as a Republican directly against Mr. Trump, and I submit to you that Mr. Trump is not an economic conservative. And I would like to run perhaps somewhat differently than Republicans have in the past, certainly in Massachusetts. I want to get away from the statism of the Republican Party as currently constituted, and the role it plays in Washington, where you have the 2 parties just not working at all, just locked in a death spiral embrace to use each other to scare their base to give them more money so they can get reelected. When I was in office, I was national chair of U.S. term limits, so I didn't really care so much about getting reelected. And my view is they got everything in Washington upside down and backwards. I would emphasize, in addition to anti-tax, other issues that I hope would be dear to the hearts and minds of people in New Hampshire. One of them would be guns. I've made a study of every society where the government made it impossible or illegal to own a firearm. In almost all of those, the first thing that happens is that the part of the population that doesn't support the government gets slaughtered, literally killed. Hitler passed a law in Germany making it impossible for Jews to own a firearm, so that when the knock came on the door to take them off to the concentration camps, there was no way they could resist the Stasis. That was 12 million people. Joe Stalin in Russia, same thing. Illegal to own a firearm. 20 million people die in the gulags out in eastern Siberia. But not just those 2 famous bad boys, everybody in the 20th century who made it impossible to own a firearm. Idi Amin in Uganda slaughtered the 50% of the population who were not part of their coalition. So my tour of duty in the Libertarian Party brought home to me one thing absolutely, and that's that the whole gun and firearm issue, it's not about hunting, it's not about convenience, it's not about symbolism, it's about the most fundamental issues in our government, which is a bulwark against government power. At the end of the day, it's about self-defense. There are 300 million rifles out there in private hands, lawfully acquired, and if some do-gooder says, let's just have everybody take their rifle into the police station once a year and show them to the police chief, I know what's going to happen. Year one, I see your rifle. Year two, nice to see you. Year three, okay, here's my rifle, I'm leaving now. Oh no, this time your rifle is staying with us. That's exactly what would happen. So I think that kind of thinking is very dangerous. Another issue of interest to me, and I know it's not unanimous in New Hampshire on this, but I'm on the board of a cannabis company, so I have an interest in this topic, and I've studied all the research that's been done in other countries, notably Israel, to some extent Holland as well, and Canada, of the effects of ingredients like CBD, which is the non-THC ingredient of cannabis, very useful medicinal properties, including when you introduce it into people who are cancer victims with other tumor-killing agents, it makes them twice as effective. That, not to be confused, of course, with killing cancer, which is exactly what it is. And people don't want to talk about this because there's been a conspiracy against cannabis ever since the days of Reefer Madness, the famous movie back in the 1930s or 40s. And the federal government has wanted to stigmatize it, but it's long past time that we recognize that cannabis, and in particular CBD, not only is a relatively harmless substance, but it has huge medicinal values as well. And other issues that are of interest to me in the Republican primary in New Hampshire, I note that Mr. Trump has 60% unfavorable in New Hampshire right now, as of the latest national poll 2 days ago. So that certainly gives me a lot to work with. I understand that the state parties all over the country equal the Trump organization. So of course they're not going to, the party bosses, the party officers are not going to be for me. But I've been a Republican since I was 18 years old, which is more than I can say for Mr. Trump, who's been a New York City Democrat most of his life. And I don't regard my 3 years as a libertarian as wandering, because my views are absolutely the same on both sides of the football, libertarian and now Republican. I'm even saying to Democrats, conservative Democrats, any old Democrat, in New Hampshire and Massachusetts, if you're an independent, by definition, you can vote in the Republican primary. And if you're a Democrat, you just change to independent, and you can vote in the Republican primary. And I'm getting some traction with that gambit. So I think it's going to be interesting, the primary next February. And if I can show very well there, like Pat Buchanan against Bush 41, he really knocked President Bush 41 off his pins with 37% of the vote. So things happen with the first in the nation primary. Other issues that are important to me, again, not unanimous, but I do think the climate change issue and environmental protection is not a hoax. You know, it's bad that we lost the old man of the mountain. I don't want to lose the snow on the White Mountains as well, which is what would happen if the polar ice cap is permitted to melt. So those are some of the ways that I'm different than Mr. Trump. I'm totally different from him on immigration, and just my definition of democracy is a place where the individual can never be thrust in a corner, and where individual liberties have to predominate. And I don't think that's the reaction of the president we have right now. It's a thrill for me to be in New Hampshire. I'm going to be semi-living here between now and February. Peter Spalding, who will wave in the blue shirt, who was John McCain's campaign chairman in both of John McCain's insurgent victories in the First in the Nation primary, is my campaign chairman, and we aim to build on the record that Senator McCain developed in this state. I'm going to leave it at that. I really would like to know what's on your minds, but again, I thank you very much for being here, and I represent to you that in the anti-tax movement, I'm at home. Thank you.
We are going to do a question and answer session here, but just for the benefit of everybody, we're going to try to get a little bit of a tail here. Anybody have a question for Governor Weld? Okay, if you want to just come on up here and I'll hand you the mic and we'll shuttle it back and forth.
Yeah, Governor, I'm State Representative Jess Edwards, and I'm just curious what your perspective is on whether or not President Trump survived a soft coup attempt with the abuse of the FISA system, and if you were to be elected, what you would do to open up transparency into the FISA process so that we have confidence that the government, most powerful parts of the government, cannot be used against us.
The question.
I broke it.
The question is about the FISA statute, which is the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, which I'm very familiar with because I used to be head of the criminal division of the Justice Department in Washington under President Reagan. And I've long railed against the secrecy and superpower that the NSA exercises over American citizens, and I've said that the Patriot Act could stand some amendment as well. But I do think that privacy concerns, I don't know about the soft coup, but I do think that privacy concerns definitely need to be examined, and those spook statutes need to be trimmed for that reason. Thank you, sir.
We have another question in the audience. Come on down.
Yes, Hal Shurtleff, Kent Constitution, from Boston, Massachusetts. You were a big supporter of the North American Union. You were part of the commission, and are you still in favor of such a thing?
I'm very much in favor of free trade with Canada and Mexico. Matter of fact, I helped to negotiate the original NAFTA treaty with Newt Gingrich and Bill Clinton in the White House, rounding up Republican votes for that. Don't agree with Mr. Trump's ripping up as many treaties as he's done. I don't think it's been based on good information. In the case of North American free trade, the thing that was renegotiated after it was ripped up was the identical twin to what was ripped up. In the case of the Pacific Treaty, Mr. Trump was against that on the ground it would be dominated by China. He didn't know that China was not a member, and that the whole point was that we would have a beachhead of 12 Pacific-facing nations without China at the table. So it was strategically in our interest to join that treaty.
Anybody else have a question? Josh?
Hey, Mr. Weld, nice to meet you. So there's not enough emphasis today with presidential candidates on talking about natural rights, unalienable rights laid out in the Declaration of Independence. Can you, as a presidential candidate, explain to me what natural rights are and how they should be defended, and whether they should be defended or not? Life, liberty, and ownership of property. Thanks.
Well, you may recall, Gary Johnson and I would carry around a copy of the Constitution and Declaration of Independence with us wherever we went. The cornerstone, from my point of view, is the 10th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which is part of the Bill of Rights, which says that the powers not granted to the federal government are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. And that's a real strong bulwark against overreaching by the federal government, and I think it's the foundation of natural rights and legal responsibility, legal power of individuals is the cornerstone of the libertarian movement, and my thinking as well. I've been a small L libertarian since I was in law school and read Friedrich Hayek. But that's the foundation of my thinking, both when I was an L for 3 years and when I've been an R since I was 18 years old. So yes.
Anybody have any other questions? Okay, before we do that, I just want to make an announcement. It is New Hampshire, and we have some liquid sunshine falling down out there, and a number of car windows that are down as well. So unless you want to drive home in a soupy puddle, I would suggest you go out and close up your car windows. JR?
Thank you, Governor. In 2017, Rep. Hudson out of North Carolina filed House Resolution 38, which would have allowed concealed carry across state lines. Very simply, if you were allowed to be if you were legal at your home, a firearm that you carried with you, the magazine, the size of the magazine, and the ammo was legal in whatever state you were in. That bill never made it out of Congress. If that bill made it out of Congress as introduced, would you sign it?
You know, I haven't seen that one. It seems to me there might be a states' rights issue there for the receiving state. But I will tell you that under Governor Dukakis, who was my immediate predecessor in Massachusetts, they passed a law that if you went from another state into Massachusetts and you weren't compliant with Massachusetts law, you were subject to going to jail. And there was a famous case where a man's son was kidnapped, and the father, who's in New Hampshire, was in a car chasing the fellow who's kidnapped his son, and both cars got pulled over, and guess who was sent to prison in Massachusetts? The father who was in the chase car. So I guess as I talk about it, that does suggest that provision would have merit, and I would be in favor of it.
If I can, as a follow-up?
Yeah. By the way, the first thing I did when I became governor, the very first, was Governor Dukakis had put signs on all the highways entering Massachusetts, notably from New Hampshire, and they said, and I quote, tough new Massachusetts gun law, carry a gun, a year in prison. So the first thing I did was instruct my highway commissioner to take all those signs down, and I rewarded political supporters with those, and I said to Jim Karasiotis, my highway commissioner, Jim, I want one too for my home in Cambridge. And he said, do you want one with rifle holes in it or not? I said, as many as possible.
As you may be aware, the Pheasant Lane Mall sits on the border between New Hampshire and Massachusetts. If you walk out of the south end of the Pheasant Lane Mall and you step off the sidewalk, you are in Massachusetts. There's at least one court case where a person who was a New Hampshire resident was in the parking lot at the wrong end of the mall who was arrested. This law is necessary. Again, would you sign H.R. 38 as introduced?
That's the same as the law you mentioned earlier? Yeah, no, it just makes the case stronger. Thank you. Thank you so much, everybody. Lovely to be with you. Thank you.
Hard to believe, we're just getting warmed up. Another round of applause for former Massachusetts Governor Bill Weld.
Croc TV.